Welcome to the Geek Saga Podcast series, Hot D Gives and Takes. This interlude series is a follow-up to Hot D Takes, our podcast series that covered the first season of HBO's House of the Dragon. Hi, I'm Tara Lynn of Geek Saga Entertainment, and welcome to Hot D Gives and Takes. This interlude series is a follow-up to Hot D Takes, our podcast series that covered the first season of HBO's House of the Dragon. Hot D Gives and Takes will focus on the characters we loved, or maybe not, and lost in season 1 with myself, an avid reader of all things Aesop, and my friend and co-host Manny, a fan of the shows who is unsullied, aka has never read the books, as your stalwart hosts. So first things first, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at A Geek Saga.
And I'm Manny, the aforementioned unsullied co-host, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Manissimo Art. Thanks for joining us for our first episode in our interlude series, which will focus on none other than our king, Viserys I.
As a reminder, expect spoilers from the entirety of Hot D Season 1, but if you haven't read the books, don't worry, there will be very minimal book spoilers from House of the Dragon source material, Fire and Blood. We'll start by highlighting some gives, aka the moments when we thought Viserys could have done better, or the writers could have done better with him, and then focus on what we believe were his hottest takes before concluding with an overall rating of the show's treatment of our king.
Speaking of ratings, we have a rating system that we, like true Targaryens, fill in when and where we please, and that system includes rating things on a scale of 1 to 10 Targ eyebrows.
If we actually remember to use it.
If we remember to use it this time.
Last but not least, per our usual format, we are joined by a new guest for the show. Today we have Mo with us. Mo, where can everyone find you on social media, if anywhere?
Hello, I'm Mo. If you wanted to find me on social media, that'd be monstrous_Mo on Instagram and Can I Sneak Attack on Twitter. So sometimes it's just the occasional, D&D and or a Song of Ice and Fire hot take, or spoilers with no context has been my gimmick that everybody likes. So I just like screen cap a couple things that don't make sense. And if you haven't seen the episode, it's just pictures. But if you had, you're like, oh yeah, that's how it works. So
well, I promise, just one last piece of business before we dig in. We hope that you'll check out the Geek Saga Entertainment Patreon. We have 10 tiers ranging from $1 a month to $40 a month, and I'm actually in the process of doing a minor revamp that includes adding some Ice and Fire con perks and more. As always, though, it will of course include early access to these Hot D Takes podcast episodes. You can check it out at patreon.com/geeksaga_entertainment.
And now it's time to delve into the Hot D Gives portion of our show.
Seriously, what gives, Hot D? Here are the most squicky, icky, or just meh Viserys moments. Right from the top, I just wanted to get this one out of the way. Viserys and Laena. And listen, we know it was necessary for the Viserys Corlys / Targaryen Valerian drama, but ew. I wanted to know whether you guys thought Viserys was ever actually really considering this marriage.
I'm going to say no. I'm going to say that he was just being cordial, at the offer, when someone gives you something that you hate. You know what I'm saying? You just don't throw it back in their face. And especially when it's their daughter and it's, she's so young, that's a big deal, So it's wow, sure, I'll go take this walk with her and we'll talk. I'm going to say no. Or maybe he was, I don't know. Maybe he was weighing out his options, but I really don't think that he would have been down for that. That's just my personal take on it.
Yeah, no, I have to agree. I mean, in the ye old medieval fantasy context, it's sometimes you HBO always kind of goofs up the ages, specifically for certain reasons. So, they aged up Viserys and they aged down Laena to probably amplify the ick factor of that, because that's what they kind of wanted to do, and it kind of makes sense. Initially, I don't think, he's the king. He has every option, not just, his master of ship's daughter, but his hand's daughter, and probably any eligible lady of the realm. He could just go, I like you, let's get married. And you can't quite say no to that because he's the king, our king.
I'm on the same page. I don't think he was ever considering it fully. I think that there was probably a moment where he thought, ooh, I might have to do this because I don't want to piss off Corlys. But I don't think that ever came close to outweighing how he felt about how young she was, because as cute and nice as she was on their little walk and whatnot, she's young. She's so young, and you can see it, I think, in the way he looks. He just looks so awkward about it.
And that's the thing too, right? Because even when they had like young Alicent or even like Rhaenyra, I can see a king looking at those people and being like, well, I mean, they look kind of older, I guess for the kingdom, I can do that. But like this girl straight up looked like she was 10 years old, Like, I mean, this was like, bro, no, no.
I highly doubt she was super interested in it either, as kind as she was to him. But Mo, you brought up such a good point that I think people kind of have glossed over a lot, is that he really should have had his pick. But whether it was because of his mourning over Emma, or just because he was the king and couldn't really go gadding about meeting all the people the way he sent Rhaenyra to go meet all these suitors, he was kind of in this small circle, right? It's like when you're in high school and you and none of your friends have a car, so you're kind of relegated to dating people in your high school, and maybe you don't actually want any of those people, but hey, like one of them is nice to you and pays attention to you. In this case, that was Alicent with him. So, well, that's who you end up with, because it's better than the other person who's also nice to you, but maybe very immature. We'll put it that way.
This is why I connect with this character so much. It sounds like my high school times.
Oh, me too. Me too.
Date inside the circle always.
To be honest, most of the people I dated in high school were kids I'd actually known at some point as far back as elementary school or middle school, at least. So
I cannot relate because I went to an all-boys Catholic high school. So the dating pool was very strange, to say the least. So like we had the sister school that was like a couple miles down, and that's like they would always invite them, kind of thing. So it's like it was either that or you just kind of effectively had to like fend for yourself, and like there was no other way to like date people. So
it's still kind of like a similar thing though. It's still that, and again with Viserys here, he's got a really small pool, and they're really pushing him to get married. So it's like, shoot, I either have to agree to marry the 12-year-old or, well, I guess my daughter's friend will do. I don't know that he really thought through the fact that she was Rhaenyra's friend at all either. So all he knew is that she was nice to him. And to be fair, that does matter when you're lonely and mourning. And
then it kind of has to cut into play that we're talking about. Effectively, medieval Europe is kind of what we're going with. Daughters were kind of the chess pieces the fathers got to use to marry them off to kind of elevate themselves. So Corlys is doing that with Laena. And then Otto is doing that kind of thing with Alicent. He's just like, be nice. Instead of kind of doing it more publicly, like Corlys was kind of saying, and like, go for a walk. Otto was just like, why don't you wear your mother's dress because you look nice in it, kind of thing, when you go meet the king because he's sad. So I think it's, again, the women in the show, which is common in a lot of things, is that the women kind of get used by men.
Yeah, and to close this bit out, I do think that it's important to note that this moment brought to you by the story as a whole, the necessity of the Laena offer being part of the actual history, Fire and Blood, but for the drama that they needed between Viserys and Corlys particularly. But since we touched on Alicent a little bit, that carries us into this bit that I wanted to talk about from episode 3, Second of His Name, because this is a part where I was very frustrated with Viserys when he was in his cups. I think it was the night before the hunt, and he starts whining to Alicent about how he chose Rhaenyra as his heir, and now he's not sure if that was a good idea. And he later did defend Rhaenyra and his choice of her as heir. So like we've said before in our coverage of that episode, yay, that Viserys defended Rhaenyra later. And also, okay, we get that Alicent is his wife and he needs someone to vent to. But dude, maybe think about it a little bit before saying certain things to certain people. Thoughts on how Viserys handled that situation, because it does seem that I don't think we ever actually saw him do that again, complain specifically to Alicent about Rhaenyra and his choice of her as heir.
I think he was just being open and honest. Like he was just having undigested thought syndrome, that we all have when we say a bunch of shit and then we stop and we're like, oh, you know what? That actually sounds kind of terrible, and then you don't do it anymore. I feel like that might have been something that was going on there.
Yeah, I mean, he drank too much wine and spilled his guts and God knows that I can relate to that.
Oh, I have done it. Gotten myself in trouble many times.
I'll drink to that.
Yeah, drink to that. Amen.
But really, to be fair, again, I don't think we ever saw him act like that again, where he kind of trash talked. And he was upset with Rhaenyra for obvious reasons. She was ignoring all of the suitors he was throwing at her, and she was kind of acting like a brat about the whole thing and not really understanding her role in all of this if she was going to become queen. But again, as bratty as she was being, and as much as I'm sure Viserys needed to vent, like, there wasn't anybody else you could talk to. Like, talk to your squire or something, dude. Like, talk to anybody who's not a direct line to good ol' Otto.
Yeah, exactly. But you know what? He never gave up on her. He never said, you know what? He still backed her up until the end. That's why she will always be my queen.
Well, and from that same episode, too, by the way, this is kind of an aside, but I will forever argue that the scene where he had so much trouble killing the stag that they had to catch for him was so freaking hard to watch. I get the symbolism, but that does not make it better or easier. I don't want to see it ever again.
No.
Had he already cut his hand on the phone, which kind of started the health decline?
Yeah, he already had, like, some of his fingers were blackened or something, yeah.
So I think that might have, again, symbolism, proper symbolism, yes. I think, if anything, it adds to the whole thing. As last time we had, like, Game of Thrones, we had a whole Targaryen thing, and everyone's like, we never saw this coming. There weren't enough hints about Dany in season 8. So perhaps they like, oh, with episode 1, he cuts his hand. Episode 2, he struggles to kill a stag that's, already kind of restrained kind of thing. And just, we kind of get to see that decline a lot more obvious than it is in the books. And that, might have been if, like, it was D&D again or something like that.
Yeah, and for sure it was definitely part of them telling that story. It's still shocking to me, like, looking back, that as early as he had already injured himself to the point where some of his fingers are kind of rotting away and he's struggling to kill a beast that is just standing there in chains for him to...
So he might have also been hungover at this point. So I don't want to go hunting hungover. I don't want to go hunting really ever. So I don't blame him for being a little bit clumsy with the stab.
It is kind of interesting, though, to like look at the position there, right? Because the show is using that symbolism to let you know that, yes, he is a weak king, right? And that he probably doesn't need to be on the throne. But that wasn't the takeaway I got from his character as the show progressed. I don't know if they did it on purpose. I'm going to say they did do it on purpose, because the writers have been fucking amazing in this show, where I'm like, yeah, I would have no doubt that they would have like thought that through, where it's like, this is like the natural, it's very basic, right? For the people with just the lower IQs, it's like, look, he's a bad king, right? Like, he's not a good king, he's not a strong king or whatever. But if you just follow the character all the way through the end, it's like, dude, this is my fucking king, like, hands down. Just the way he handled shit, the way he was, I don't know, man. I can go on forever about this guy.
Yeah, I mean, they say that he was handed a realm in peace, and that his succession issues, or the succession issues that came from his relationships, kind of tore it apart. And that isn't entirely incorrect, but to say that he inherited a realm that was entirely at peace is also not fair and not true, because there was already all the fighting on the Stepstones, and the Great Council alone, where he was chosen as king, is proof of the fact that the realm wasn't really at peace. They had the Great Council to just kind of cement their patriarchy.
A phrase that I've said recently a lot that seems to come into play is second son syndrome. And that basically is despair to the heir. It has all of the benefits of royalty, but none of the really responsibilities. And when there were, 10 children of Jaehaerys and Alicent, he was definitely lower on the list, because everyone was expected to live, and then most of them died or exiled or Citadel, whatever. There was a lot of things that happened with all of the children. That's another thing that kind of peeved me about the show, was it was Viserys and Rhaenys, but you also had, like, Laenor. Like, they were completely going to skip it. I think at least in World of Ice and Fire, they mentioned this skipping Rhaenys entirely and going to Laenor Velaryon, because primogeniture. Like, the grandson of the first son should outlast the son of the second son, kind of thing. And I think, was it Sarah Targaryen who ran away to be a courtesan? Mm-hmm. Some of her bastard children also showed up to make claims. So, I mean, we only had like, a minute or two of seeing even Jaehaerys and the vote take place. I would have said, if they had thought about it better in hindsight 2020, they weren't so worried about, say, second season. Great Council 101 could have been an entire episode, and they could have gotten through all of that. We could kind of see him effectively with Viserys reluctantly takes the throne, because I'm pretty sure he was never expecting it.
I don't think he was expecting it, really, and I don't think he really wanted it all that much either. And we'll touch on that later, because that is something I did want to talk about in more positive aspects of everything about Viserys. But I agree, they could have spent more time on the Great Council and used that as a way to show Viserys not really being into this role that was given to him. As well as, I don't know that they necessarily needed there to be more people vying for the throne, but I think showing a little bit more between him and Rhaenys too would have given us a better picture of their relationship or lack of it, and how she felt, because throughout season 1, Rhaenys does not really seem all that hurt about not being queen. And in reality, she was a little bit, but I think they could have done a better job of showing that relationship, because she could have been nasty to him. She could have hated him, but they made it more about Corlys and him, which was an interesting choice. I'm not like arguing with it or whatever. I do get why they did it, because they wanted to tell a full story with season 1, because they were worried they wouldn't get a season 2, but who knows. Moving on to episode 4, King of the Narrow Sea. I was talking with Manny last night about this episode. We were laying out some things we wanted to talk about. And what was it you typoed?
I said it was the conversation with the curtains, and then I was like, or the drapes, whatever. Like, or the tapestries. I can't remember. I was like, or what?
You corrected yourself eventually and said tapestries for sure.
Yeah, that's what it was.
But as Manny's saying these things to me,
yeah,
I typed in the document.
I'm looking at it. Yeah, I'm looking at it, and I see her type that, and I almost spit out like my drink. I was like, okay.
So what I typed, by the way, is the curtains don't match the drapes. AKA, this thing that we're about to talk about is something that both Manny and I agreed seemed pretty out of character for Viserys. So that's what we're saying when we say the curtains don't match the drapes. Viserys' actions and words in this scene didn't really seem to match his character. And what we're discussing is about tapestries. And it's when Viserys is so rude about those damn tapestries, when Alicent is like, hey, Daemon, you want to go see the pretty tapestries we were gifted? Because poor Alicent's just trying to be included.
Yeah. I'm guilty of doing similar things to that in the past. Like, I'll get a little wasted, get a little drunk, and then like say something stupid like that. So it was definitely out of character. I think he might have just started the day drinking a little early that day, maybe, and but it definitely felt like, I think he was just having fun is what it was. And maybe he's a guy who just doesn't have fun regularly, so he doesn't know how to rein himself in when necessary. And I thought that it was like totally insulting to Alicent, stuff like that. But I thought it was really sweet that Rhaenyra was like, oh, I'd like to see them, just to kind of take the edge off.
I think that you're right. Some of it was drinking. Again, Viserys, man. Maybe after this, he stopped drinking, because he's seen some episodes 3 and 4 that seem just kind of, man, you shouldn't have done that. You should know better. And then this seems out of character for him to be kind of rude to Alicent about the tapestry thing. Yeah, maybe he quit drinking after this, but
yeah,
it was very awkward. And I feel like even Alicent's reaction to his words was, she seemed shocked that he said that, not necessarily because it was mean, but because, again, I think she thought it was out of character too, because he has also been, as far as we have seen, very kind to her to this point. Even looking back, I'm trying to figure out how it might have fit into his character development or anything. And all it really did was serve to allow Alicent to have a moment with Rhaenyra, which is great, but I still don't know that it was a totally necessary out of character thing that needed to be in there.
I agree.
Yeah. The only reason I could think that they did that was, one, day drinking, that doesn't surprise me. I also have to think, like, maybe at this point in the marriage, he also realized, maybe she wasn't, he didn't really marry for love. That wasn't a situation. So maybe he's just a little bit jaded about that. We also have to deal with Daemon Targaryen, the rogue prince, this Matt Damon, as I heard his nickname.
Matt Damon.
This embodiment of, arrogant machismo. And while Viserys is effectively an indoor kid, be like very much like, hey, Daemon, do you want to go look at? I don't think Daemon even like aside from it being his brother, I don't think Daemon cares about Viserys's stone diorama. Like I don't think he'd care about tapestries. So it might just be like just kind of brushing it off, like, no, he doesn't want to see the tapestries because like, he's Daemon Targaryen. He's the coolest guy in the Seven Kingdoms. Like looking at tapestries. Additionally, I know there was something that happened as Alicent and the Greens faction moved in, was they were started replacing with more Seven imagery. So maybe it was like, maybe Viserys did even like the tapestries because it doesn't have, what do they call it, the Valyrian Sutra or something like that, like all of the like I don't remember what they called it. Either like the Targa Sutra or the Valyria Sutra. All of these beautiful Valyrians and dragons and these sexual it's that. Alicent got new tapestries. Maybe he didn't even like them, so he could just be agreeing with Daemon. You wouldn't like these because they're not Valyrian kind of thing.
Yeah.
I do very much think that he knows that Daemon is an outside kid and not super into wandering around museums type of thing. I also think maybe a little bit it was him trying to show off for his brother. His brother just kicked some major ass in the Stepstones and comes back, exultant, and everybody's like, oh, Daemon, look at this badass shit that he did. And Viserys is over here being Viserys, getting cut by the throne, fingers rotting away at the very least, got this meek little wife, pretty, yes, highborn, but meek little wife, and Daemon can do whatever the fuck he wants. And like maybe some of it was just him showing off for his brother a bit, which still seems out of character for me because there's things that we'll touch on later that he didn't like about Daemon, and this kind of plays to the things he didn't like about Daemon. So it's, again, still seems out of character, but I'll give him that maybe he was just trying to show off a little bit too. So the last couple gives are a little bit more generic, but some things that we absolutely have to talk about because they're probably the most frustrating bits of Viserys' character. First being the entire situation with good old Otto. Like every time Viserys lent Otto his ear or listened to Otto's nonsense without clapping back, which he did, to be fair, he did clap back at Otto. I mean, as we know, he kicked him out of the small council for a bit there, but then he sent him away for good reason and brought him back.
Bad decision. What a mess. Viserys seems to be a creature of habit, so he's just like, okay, it's the devil kind of situation. Yeah, I'll bring him back. But I think he understood that. I mean, I'm hoping that he understood that Otto was like the part when he's talking about Rhaenyra marrying off and he points out the child, and he's just like, Otto, he's 2 years old or whatever. Like, what the hell are you thinking? I don't know. Yeah, anytime he lent him his ear, man, it was just, I mean, honestly, it's like a person who keeps running back to their ex. It's just because there's nobody around. And they're just like, I just don't want to be alone, and I don't want to have to like get a handle on someone else's personality. So it's like, I just want this one. It's going to be the easiest path for him.
He wasn't that bad,
Exactly. Like, yeah, he was bad, but
bad on occasion. I mean, we have to dig into Otto a little bit. Was his first few years, he was hand of the king to Jaehaerys. And like, I think he was young then. I want to say maybe Viserys, because Viserys is effectively, I'm trying to think of the phrase, it's like you don't want to upset anybody, you just want to be friends with everybody. So it could just be that, where he's just like, like Otto's been doing this forever, and then he kicked him out. But then when he had to kind of think of a new one, it's like, well, I mean, he's weighing the options. Like Otto has been hand of the king for, at least a couple decades at this point. And we're also still dealing with the fact of like Viserys is like the 5th Targaryen king. So like this concept of like finding a hand is a little bit new. And like he didn't have a Ned Stark. He had Daemon, but nobody wanted Daemon.
I don't even think he wanted Daemon.
No, he like no. That's the thing, is he probably didn't even want Daemon. Like he had that as an option to use an heir or another person who might come to inherit kind of thing. But like that comes with the thing of like, if you want to be everybody's friend, do you have a good friend that you can explicitly trust? And while that might not have been Otto was probably the next best thing.
Oh, and I'm sure that Alicent had a hand in it too. She is his wife after all, so I'm entirely certain that she's like, but my dad did fine, and you could bring him back. I would like to have my dad back. Just a little bit of a hint here, like.
Yep.
Piggybacking on that is Viserys being too tolerant and lenient with a lot of people and about a lot of things. And he does get firm once in a while. I mean, the time he was literally kicking Daemon while he was down for good reason. And this is something that was asked during the Patty Considine panel that I went to at the Game of Thrones convention in LA, where somebody said, do you, Patty, think that Viserys was too tolerant, too lenient? And the specific question, I believe, was focused more on Alicent and their children. And Viserys kind of like, I mean, yes, he was too tolerant and lenient about stuff with Alicent, but with the kids, he didn't pay enough attention to them to be tolerant or lenient. They just existed and whatever. But Patty Considine did specifically mention Rhaenyra. He said, yes, Viserys was really tolerant and lenient with too many people. That also includes Rhaenyra because she was being an asshole and he was putting up with it. And the audience just cracked up about that for obvious reasons because everybody loves Rhaenyra, right? At this point. But at the same time, yes, she absolutely was an asshole sometimes, particularly when she was younger and after she found out she was heir and just kind of not playing to the role that she really needed to fill, as I mentioned earlier. It was interesting to hear that spoken out loud because I think that the discussion surrounding Viserys's tolerance and leniency with people often goes more toward Alicent and Otto and even Daemon. People rarely seem to mention Rhaenyra, and it is true. He was kind of too tolerant and lenient with her as well.
This is another check mark in the box of why me and the king are just why I connect with him so much, because I do the same fucking thing, dude. And I always tell people I'm like extremely lenient. I'm extremely patient to a fault. That's the same kind of crap. It's like people will do stuff and they'll do stuff and I'm just like, I'm trying to keep the peace and just like, oh, and then you just kind of like, and it's just kind of people getting away with shit around you, and yeah, man, way too lenient, but like I can't shit on him. I have to look at myself in the mirror and then shit on him and be like, because you're the same fucking way, man.
You have to reflect on your own decision. No one wants to do that.
Exactly. Too fucking lenient, dude. Too lenient. But he was firm when necessary. He kicked the shit out of Daemon, like he lost his shit. And it was like, okay, cool. That was cool to see too, though, because it was like, yeah, okay, you're not just like a glass of water. Like there is a limit to your patience. You do have a boundary there, which was cool to see.
I think he's probably the most lenient with Rhaenyra more than anybody because she is kind of the only thing he's got left of Aemma. He loves Alicent. I'm sure he loves Rhaenyra and he loves his kids and he loves his brother, but like Aemma, that's kind of what we got to get back into. So maybe that's the reason he was much more lenient with her. And we were dealing with the growing of his kids with Alicent, but also his own kind of decline. So that might not be the way he was as attentive with his children with Alicent because he had his own stuff to deal with, keeping the realm together and his own health and that kind of thing.
I would actually say that while he was too lenient with Daemon sometimes, I think he was the least lenient with Daemon out of all the other people we've mentioned, because how many times did he like kick him out? Yes, he didn't send armies after him to go collect him when he did stupid shit or when he balked parts of Viserys' orders. But every time Daemon fucked around, he did find out. Viserys was like, get out, go away, go back to the Vale. Well, okay, Daemon didn't go back to the Vale, but he also knew better than to come back to King's Landing, at least for a long while.
Until he could give it to the Driftwood Crown and be like, yep, see, like, now I can come back. And then they hug it out. And he's like, yeah, okay.
Now, I guess we can move into our Viserys hot takes. Yay! Obviously, we've padded what we've been saying so far with already quite a bit of positive stuff about Viserys, which I knew was going to have him. Hot take number 1 is from episode 1, Heirs of the Dragon. And I put this in here knowing that it's going to probably be kind of controversial. But honestly, Viserys' choice to try to save the baby over Aemma in episode 1 is, I think, something that Viserys gets a lot of flack for from fans. And to be honest, we even gave him quite a bit. And I'm not saying he doesn't deserve some of it. Because yes, he did not handle it well. He should have had a moment with his wife to tell her what was going on, what was happening at the very least. But instead, he just let them do it without any explanation to her. And her very visceral fear and how bloody really that scene was is what really sticks out in everybody's minds. For obvious reasons, it was horrific and so true to at least past life with women in childbirth that it's hard to really think about what Viserys' mindset was at that time. And again, obviously, Emma's comfort and what happened to her is more important than his mindset. But because the focus always seems to be on, God damn, Viserys, that was a shitty decision. Why'd you do that awful thing? I do think it's important to point out that he was told in no uncertain terms that maybe the baby could be saved, but no matter what, Emma would die. So
Yeah.
rather than choose to lose them both, and by the way, she would have continued to suffer for hours, if not longer, he chanced being able to save his child. Again, he could have handled it better, but just going to repeat it. I think he gets a lot of flack from people who weren't paying much attention to the situation, which is why I wanted to put this in as a sort of positive thing, because he is conflicted with the choice he has to make. And I don't think it's about his obsession with an heir. I think it's about seeing his wife suffer, knowing that he might very likely lose the baby, his child, as well. And he didn't handle it the right way, but I still don't think he deserves all of the flack he gets for it.
I think that he got a lot of flack for it, but I think that nobody was thinking clearly after that scene. I know I certainly was not. That scene, it was just, couldn't do it. I was like, this is a lot. Yeah, but you're absolutely right. Looking at it in hindsight, right? When I was like not thinking about the scene so much, but thinking more of the situation, I was like, yeah, she was going to die regardless. I wish they were like a little more humane about it. Like maybe they should have like nicked an artery or something and let her bleed out first and then chop her up. But like, I'm not a doctor, so I don't know if that is something that would have been viable. He had an impossible decision to make, but really it's not that impossible. There was really, if they had a chance and they told him that there was a chance to save the baby, I think anybody would have made that choice under those circumstances.
I mean, Viserys was given a rock and a hard place. I have no children. I'm not married, so it's a very crazy decision to think that's something like as a possible parent you will have to possibly make. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. He probably did not handle it the best, but it was one of those things that again, the circumstances were just so serious that I don't think if he made any decision, the audience opinion would go in his favor. It was all bad. It's just all bad. Book readers already kind of knew how it was going to go, but it's like, oh, but I would have. You don't know how you're going to handle that situation, and Viserys didn't, and it just kind of he had to make a decision, and that's the one he made, and it still ended bad. So,
well, moving on to stuff that's maybe a little bit more positive, hopefully.
Yeah.
Overall, hot take number 2: the prophecy. And every time Viserys talked about it, with the slight exception of the very end of his life where he clearly thought he was talking to Rhaenyra and was talking to Alicent and going on about it to her. But even then, his last desire was to remind Rhaenyra of her duty and of what the prophecy foretold and how important it was that a Targaryen be on the throne, et cetera, et cetera. But prior to that, at the end of episode 1, when he reveals it to her, the whole scene was so well done. The writing, the acting. It was one of those things where book readers obviously had no idea this was coming. This isn't something we've ever heard before. But after it happened, I remember like sitting there for a couple minutes and the book reader part of me was like, what the fuck is this? But I also knew that Martin was heavily involved in the series. So I understood that this is not a decision that the writers made without his input. So after sitting on it for a couple minutes, I was like, you know what? I'm going to ignore this. Us book readers have never heard this before and focus on the fact that we are being given a really fucking cool tidbit of history that we have never known before via this show, which really didn't happen as far as I can remember with Game of Thrones ever. And on top of that, again, everything about that scene, how they're standing with Valerian's skull and the candles, and Viserys is telling this to his daughter, who he has decided will be his heir. It's just, I don't know. I'm a little verklempt about it. The more I think about it, the more I'm just excited about how it happened, how it went, everything. And Viserys making that decision to tell Rhaenyra was great. And again, the acting was great. The writing in the scene was great. Our king, man.
Yeah, dude, hell yeah. I thought it was fantastic, that whole scene. I'm not gonna get into my own thought process about prophecies. I've already said it enough that I fucking hate them. But the way they did this scene was awesome. And yeah, like the dagger with like the fire and everything, and it's like got the writing on it. I mean, that was cool. The scene was awesome. The cinematography was great. The way it looked and the fact that he's telling Rhaenyra this. Yeah, dude. Hands down, like that scene was awesome.
It was absolutely cool. We also have to remember, I think another fun thing was that Valyrian, obviously it was Aegon's dragon, it was Maegor's dragon, but it was also Viserys' dragon for a brief period of time. And that's actually something that doesn't get brought up, is that it's part of the reason the scales kind of tilted in Viserys' favor was, yeah, but he rode Valyrian. And then Valyrian died, and the rode another dragon kind of thing. So, it is drawing in the past. This kind of like secret oral tradition. Again, we at book readers never knew this existed or was a thing. Prophecies are, Martin specifically tends to make prophecies just vague enough and just complicated enough that like they encompass too many things and they never go the way they're supposed to. That's kind of what he's done with a lot of things, and that tends to be how it is. It was a very powerful scene. I do think it was something that, again, book readers weren't expecting. It was a good, like, little tidbit of, like, deep lore that, that's, like, deep in the lore iceberg that I don't think anybody was expecting to happen. I mean, that might just be something Martin has had in his back pocket for, I don't know, so long. And he's like, let's just throw that in there. Like, hey, Ryan Condal, just do that. It'll be fun. It was really cool.
Since we mentioned like the cinematography, the setting, everything, obviously Balerian Skull, the candles, they had that setup. Obviously not exactly because it wasn't the giant room and everything there, but they had that full setup with the candles and everything at San Diego Comic-Con this year as part of the House of the Dragon installation that was outside of the convention. So like anybody could go to it. It usually involved waiting in line for like 6 to 8 hours or more, but it was super cool too to have that experience at Comic-Con and be like, okay, sure, it's super cool to see Balerian Skull. I love this, like the dark room with the candles around the skull and everything. This is great. And then watching the episode and be like, oh, holy shit, I was kind of there. But yes, the setting for him telling her this, the fact that it was with the dragon skull, and also, again, him deciding to tell her this is his acceptance of her as heir and of his decision to make her his heir. It's important to him, it's important to his story, it's important to her story, it's important to the story as a whole, and I loved it.
I think it also has to be a thing that, like, again, the prophecy kind of always gets skewed. That tends to be a common theme, and we have to like look at it from a perspective of this is a prequel to Game of Thrones. So then we also look at the kings between Dance of Dragons and like Mad King, and you have to notice like some Targaryen kings have made no effort of like giving a care about prophecies. But then you have, Aerys the First and Aegon the Fifth, who start digging into prophecies a lot more, and Bloodwave a little bit. And then the Mad King goes pretty deep with it too, and Rhaegar starts to dig into it. So like the kings tell the heirs, and then how they handle it is kind of just depends on the personality. And then we also have to realize that like when the Mad King and Rhaegar died, I don't think Viserys III or Dany knew this prophecy, or Jon Snow, secret Targaryen, definitely didn't know this as a prophecy, but it came true, kind of. It all connects a little bit.
Yeah. I think really my end thought is it was just nice to see it come from Viserys, because in Fire and Blood, he's not really given much at all, much thought, much discussion even. He's just kind of this is how the Dance of the Dragons happened. That's it. And I've said this before, I believe in like our very first episode, that Martin had done an interview where he admitted that he didn't like writing Viserys, and that's why there's not really much about him. He didn't like him as a character, but they gave him so much in this season, and Patty Considine was so great with all of it that it changed Martin's opinion of the character that he created, which
That's
that
awesome.
in itself is like,
I mean, yeah, it's got to give props to Patty about that too, that he can, and the writers of Hadid, be able to like change the whole author's own perception of the character. That's good on the writers. That's good on the actor that they can do that.
Now, hot take number 3. We've already touched on this a little bit. Episode 4, King of the Narrow Sea, at the end, after good old Otto plays his good old gossip auto card and reveals, quote unquote, to Viserys that something happened between Rhaenyra and Daemon. And Viserys finds Daemon on the ground in the throne room, I think, right? Like he's just kind of like, I can't remember if he finds him on the ground or if Daemon trips and falls or something, but they meet up in the throne room and Daemon is on the ground or ends up on the ground, and Viserys literally like kicks the poo out of him after hearing about this transgression. It's a violent side of Viserys that we hadn't seen before and never see again. But that's his girl, that's his daughter. And yes, obviously there's the whole she's the heir and she needs to be seen as pure and shit like this can't happen. And also, what the fuck, Daemon, that's your niece who's so much younger than you, etc. There's a million different things that go into why Viserys might have done this. However, this was not in the script either. Viserys kicking Daemon while he's down and brandishing the knife at him was something that just happened in the moment.
Wow, that's awesome. That makes that scene even better.
Yeah.
Honestly, because it's just like fresh, it's raw. I love it. I think what he had going on there was just daddy bear syndrome. You know what I'm saying? I have a daughter, and I can tell you right now that I would not have been anywhere near as lenient as he was to like my brother if something happened. I'd have been like, oh, I'm going to gut you like a fish. I'm going to do it live on television is what I'm going to do. Send a message. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I definitely felt like he was lenient in a sense, right? Because he was giving Daemon a chance, like, to not just knife him, because that's what I would have done. honestly, I can't even say like with certainty that part of it had to do with her being like because she's the heir or anything like that. I really feel like it was just like a paternal instinct. Like, you touched my fucking daughter, I'm pissed. I'm gonna kick the poo out of you. You know, like.
Yeah.
That's the way I saw it.
And I mean, obviously, there's all sorts of incest with Targaryens, right?
Yeah,
but
that's true.
I think this is less about him being her uncle and more about the age difference and also just Daemon's a bad boy, man.
He's trouble. Yeah, he's trouble, but good trouble.
I mean, I just realized like Daemon just left her there. That's another thing. I'm just like, never mind that you're her uncle and you're a lot older than her, and bloodlines are muddied to say the least. But like, and you know that this is my daughter and the heir to the kingdom, and you're just gonna leave an impressionable and pretty innocent young girl in a brothel and flea bottom, and it's like, no, you don't do it. Like, bad boy stuff aside, like, don't do that. I'm not a parent, but like, I have very few friends that, like, if that happened with me, my friend told me it had like a situation happen. I'm like, man, like, where are they? I'll kick the butts right now, and we're streaming that live at 10 p.m. on HBO. Let's go. Like,
I think that part of that may have to do with Daemon like understanding who Rhaenyra was really quickly. And yeah, it wouldn't have like ditched her, but I think there might have been a part of him where it's going to be like, look, you're going to get back home just fine, or you're going to learn how to get back home. I don't know. I think that part of it was that he just kind of saw in her that she's not just some damsel in distress woman, and he's just like, she'll make it home just fine.
Yeah, meanwhile, all Viserys is thinking is like, you took my young daughter, my heir, out on the town among the ruffians and peasants. So even if nothing physical happened between the two of them, or had happened between the two of them, there absolutely still would have been like that. How dare you have taken, like, uncle taking like an underage nibbling out to a bar to get drunk.
Yeah.
So, all right, hot take number 4. All of episode 8, which is called Lord of the Tides, but really is just all about Viserys. It's his last episode, obviously, but leading up to this, we've seen him deteriorating, and at this point, he is just the partial person, physically, for sure, and in other ways probably as well. And all he wants is for everybody to get along. And he gets his happy family dinner. The acting, Patty's acting, if he doesn't get nominated for an Emmy based on this episode's performance alone, I will riot.
Agreed. I will be there also, because yes, absolutely.
Same. I agree.
This whole scene was like, it was just really touching, like how happy he was. And even when he looked over at Otto and just kind of like they nodded their head at each other. Like, it was just like, I don't know, man. There was a part of it that made me feel like a kid again. Like when I would go and like have, back in the day, and, we had a really big family back then. So it was like, and it just, that's what it made me think of, and the kids are playing, and I mean, no one got gutted or anything, but, like, and everyone's having a good time. And he just wanted, just, what, I just want my family here, and I just want to hang out. I mean, it was touching, and like the condition that he was in was hard to look at. I don't know, man. It was a touching scene, and you're absolutely right. He needs to get an Emmy for that. Like, it was so fucking good.
It is Viserys' last episode, for it to be about him. And it really is that way, because we do have Rhaena and Daemon showing up with, new grandchildren, and they're named Viserys and Aegon. It's cute. Rhaenyra finally gets to ask for him to, like, defend her in the situation, and he never sits the crown. The march to the crown, and the crown falls, and Daemon helps him. And, like, I remember hedging my bets, like, in a split second of, like, who's going to help him, what's going to happen. Is he going to fall? Is, like, the crown falls, right? So it's like, who's going to pick it up, right? I thought, like, we didn't know what was going to happen, because it's like, I think who picked it up was going to change everything, So I was the way the strands of fate, and for it to be Daemon to just help his older brother on the throne and give it back to him. It was a check mark, and Damon's not so bad. He's so bad, but he's not so bad. I felt it could have been a lot different. The opinion could have been drastically different if it was Otto just hand helping the king, or if it was Rhaenyra, or if it was Aegon. I would have loved it for it to be Aegon too, to like just step up and not be a shit. Or like, what if it was Jace? Or what if it was, it could have been anybody. And then it's that broken family comes together for a holiday kind of vibe. Or, it's like, all right, well, this sick person in the family, this might be the last Christmas kind of situation. And, they all get together, and he has his happy moment with everybody. And then he leaves, and it goes bad.
Everything in this episode, it re-cemented how sad his life really was. And I mean, really, like the previous episode, when the kids have their little gang fight, Viserys doesn't, that's a point where he is too lenient. But in the end, for sure, he kind of tells Alicent to stand the fuck down. Thank God, he does put his foot down about that. But coming from that to getting to see this, where you realize, like, yes, time has passed, but God, how much he had already been struggling, and now he's a shell of a person, and he is still doing his duty. Really, he goes to sit on the throne and deal with the problem at hand, because he realizes, like, I'm king and I got to deal with it. And his suffering is palpable. Yeah. It's not that he doesn't want to be there. It's that he really shouldn't be, possibly like bordering on can't, honestly, as we see him struggle to get to the throne and everything. At least he got a little bit of a rally with the dinner, not just that he was happy, but he seemed better for a little while. And some of that obviously is probably because he was feeling good about life in that moment, or in those moments at that dinner. But the writing and the range of acting from Paddy Considine in this episode was just, it's probably one of my top 5 episodes of TV ever, if I just focus on how it made me feel and how well I thought the character who it was focused on did. And then at the very end, obviously, we lose him. And of course, we all had to have seen it coming, right? Maybe not at the end of this episode. I think everybody expected it to happen in episode 9, but it makes sense just because of the Game of Thrones, like episode 9's the biggest episode usually thing. But I think Viserys had to die first for there to be like a big sort of dramatic episode 9. Yes, there was no lopping off of Ned's head or red wedding happening here, but for the drama and just, whoa, what the fuck nonsense that happened in episode 9 to happen, Viserys had to go first. And he, at the very least, got to go with his last real memories being seeing his whole family together and getting along for the most part. And I can't remember where I saw an interview, or maybe Patty made a post, because I follow him on Instagram, with his death scene where he's got like the labored, it was funny because he was he actually mentioned how hard it was to like lay there and do like these takes where he's like having to breathe like this and he's just really thirsty all the time, and it was rough on him. But Patty said that what he imagined was Viserys thinking about how he was finally going to Emma. Yes, he was going to get relief from his suffering, but really what he was focused on was that he was going to be with Emma in whatever sort of afterlife Targaryens ascribe to. I don't know how much information there is on that, if anything at all, but knowing that Patty had this very specific idea of what was happening in his mind, just it makes the scene play so well, right? He could have just been like, heh, heh, bye forever, but he really acted it, and maybe in a way he didn't have to, but it was great.
And you can feel it in his acting, and the fact of like him like thinking about he was finally going to see Emma. I never fucking thought about that. And then when I go back and I watch the scene, I'm like, oh, I can totally see it. Yeah, I mean, he added so much to it with just these little subtleties, and I mean, God bless him, dude. He really fucking brought his A game to this, and yeah, that was fucking great, man.
I also have I personally always like special effects, so I thought what they did with this effectively, I don't know if they ever even say what it is. It's effectively some kind of leprosy. It seems like he has, but like he comes in the gates, looking effectively like a Dark Souls boss, or some enemy out of Elden Ring walking to the throne with this gold mask, which again, everything from from the books, we didn't know he had this they amped up the illness for sure. But this golden mask, and he takes it off to show his family and understanding. It was icky, yeah. But the special effects they did with that, and like the effects of CGI that they threw in there, which was like for a second I didn't know. I'm like, how'd they do that? Because I'm like, he's got an eyeball. They didn't take that out for the bit. He's not that method.
Patty Considine is so married to his work that he let his eyeball get poked out.
Yeah, so I was like, for a second, like I was like, okay, like special effects and CGI, like when you can find the right balance for that, I love that happening, because usually it's either too much CGI and you can tell, or it's too much practical effects and doesn't it's powerful kind of thing. And I think all of it was Viserys and Patty's episode, but I think effectively he needed to die in episode 8 to kind of flick the dominoes that then cause the Dance of the Dragons. Like, we can't have Dance with the Dragons or Dance of the Dragons until Viserys dies. So if episode 9 is always the most dramatic, you can't have him there. Like, they just had to place it either like the first minute of episode 9, the last minute of episode 8.
Well, and just to like round out the conversation about the idea that Viserys was thinking of how he was going to kind of be with Emma again. And we talked about this, I believe, in episode 11 of Hot D Takes, where we did kind of our overall summary of the season. Patty had made a post again on Instagram where he kind of said that he believed that Viserys, from the moment Emma died, that colored everything that he did, and that he never really wanted a cure for his illness. He never really sought to get better to any sort of extreme extent, because he felt so guilty about the choice that he'd made with Emma, and also B, the end goal was always to just be with her again. And I know that this is the actor's take on it, but I think that because Patty had these ideas, had these takes on who Viserys was, why he did what he did, that's a huge part of why this character has stuck with us even after his death. And on that note, gonna move on to hot takes 5 through 7, which are actually all from the Game of Thrones convention in a way. These hot takes, I'm lumping them together in a way because they all came from sitting in on Patty Considine's panel on Sunday of the Game of Thrones convention that happened back in December of last year. Oh my God, I can't believe it was last year already as we record this. But number 5 is, at that panel, someone asked him why he was a more absent father with Alicent's kids. And Patty said, I'm paraphrasing this a little bit, Viserys was rotting away like more and more, and imagined how self-conscious that made him. The more parts that were falling off of him, the more he was detached.
That's good.
And listen, it's funny. It's funny, but also in a way it's not, because he's literally saying that this man was so sick and self-conscious about how sick he was that he didn't want to be around people. He couldn't think about being with his kids, spending time with them, whatever. Obviously there was more to him being an absent father than that. But again, this just speaks to Patty's dedication to understanding how his character was. This wasn't an answer that he came up with on the fly. The joke part of it was, okay, the more parts falling off of him, the more he was detached. That was on the fly. It absolutely was. You could tell. But the thought process as a whole was something that he went through. And the idea that we could watch this show, know that Viserys was an absent father with his 3 younger children, which is a very sad and depressing thing, and still cheer for him is like, whoa, like, what have you done to us, Viserys?
We also have, absent fathers. Like, we also like Bobby B. He was definitely an absent father. I don't know if he has redeeming qualities, but he's liked in the fan community situation. And I get where the actor's coming from. That's the thing. It's like, I didn't know about Paddy Considine as an actor other than, like, he was a cop in Hot Fuzz. That's all I knew him from. So, like,
he was in Peaky Blinders as well, but that was a very, very different character than Hot Fuzz, obviously, but also than Viserys. I think that, yes, Robert Baratheon, also absent father, gets a lot of love from fandom, but I think a lot of the fandom love for Bobby B is tempered by, like, he was a gregarious guy, he was funny, etc. Whereas Viserys in Fire and Blood, he was passed over, so we never really thought much about him, I think, as readers. At least I certainly didn't. He was like short bits of paragraphs here and there for a bit, and then he died, and that was the more important thing, what happened after he died. But this made him into a tragic character. And it's kind of hard, I think, at least for me and clearly for a lot of people, to not fall in love a bit with a well-written, well-acted, tragic character.
Yep, agreed. I never thought about the rotting and how it made him self-conscious, but, putting myself in that position, I probably would have done the same thing, honestly. So I can't shit on him for being an absent father.
It's like you can a little bit, because, like, dude, maybe Baby Gone wouldn't have turned out so bad if you
I think Baby Gone was kind of fucked regardless, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, I think if you're doing that shit, I don't think there's anything your parents could have done to help the situation. You were just fucking a bad apple off the start.
Maybe Aemond, hello, fellow young Targaryens, would have been such an asshole.
Yeah. That's kind of where, again, Baby Gone, that's kind of where, like, the second son syndrome kicks in. Like, he knew he was never going to be king, right? He didn't expect to be king because everyone said Rhaenyra was Theo. He was like, yeah, Rhaenyra's Theo. I'm going to do what I want. And what he wanted to do wasn't good at all. But, like, who's going to stop him? Because he had all of the royalty perks and none of the royalty responsibilities.
Well, for number 6, we have the crown scene, which we have already touched on a couple times, actually. But there's a few things about this that I wanted to talk about. And again, this is, when I say this comes from the Game of Thrones convention panel, it's because I learned things at that panel that I had no idea about. Maybe they hadn't ever been mentioned in interviews or whatever. First things first, and this is just kind of a side note, but a very interesting thing, I think, is that Paddy Considine actually messed up his hip because of how he walked as Viserys, that last episode particularly. Just the amount of time he spent kind of hunkered down, limping around, whatever. He messed up his hip. And last month, this is literally last month at the convention, he said his hip was still messed up from it. That's some dedication.
That's
again.
Dedication, yeah.
But more importantly, the crown scene, also not scripted.
I believe it.
So the first time they filmed it, it was because of the makeup and the mask that he was wearing and the way he was walking as well, hunched over. It was hard to get the crown to stay on period. So the first time they filmed it, the crown fell off. And again, not scripted, Matt Damon came up and helped him to the throne, picked up the crown and put it on his head after he sat down. And Paddy Considine said that him and Matt Smith talked about it afterward, and they were both so set on making sure that it stayed in the episode that he made sure that crown fell off every single time they shot that scene.
Nice. That's chemistry right there, man. That's some
Yeah.
good chemistry, because that scene, I couldn't even imagine it without that scene happening, like in that episode. I mean, that was just so powerful and so good.
As I mentioned earlier, how like when the crown fell, I'm like, who gonna pick it up? Because the trees of opinion and like cool factor on who picks it up and helps into the throne will drastically change, you know, the fandom opinion of some of these characters. I think it's very cool, maybe just because we have different showrunners or George is a bit more involved in it, that like the actors can play off the unscripted moments and be like, yeah, let's do that. Let's have some unscripted things and like, you know, see what happens with it.
It humanizes Daemon quite a bit, actually, for sure, at a time when it's needed to an extent. But it also portrays their relationship in a different light a little bit too, because we've seen them be frustrated with each other. We've seen them clearly care about each other, but this is the first time I think that you see what seems like a very natural brotherly relationship and interaction that you also didn't really expect based on everything that's come before. Yes, obviously the picking up of the crown and the helping Viserys to the throne and putting the crown on his head is more about Daemon maybe, but I still think that the fact that it started out as just literally a costume malfunction and turned into one of the best scenes in the entire season. I mean, I would definitely place this in my top 5 scenes in the entire season. That says a lot.
Another check mark on why Patty should get the Emmy. Oh, this is a Warburton malfunction. Hey, we're putting this in. No, we're making sure this is an unscripted thing that's being put in, you know, put in the scene. But as you said, like the brotherly thing, the initial parallel I had was like, I don't think Stannis would ever do that for Robert. I don't think Renly would do that for Robert.
Fuck, you know? Renly sure as hell wouldn't.
Because Renly,
Stannis, I don't think either.
No. Yeah, I'm just imagining like kingly brothers to the king. Like that's the first parallel I come with. And like, yeah, they wouldn't do that, but Daemon would. Maybe it's not so bad after all, guys.
Yeah.
I have to say this just because I am the guest on the podcast. As much as people love and hate and love to hate and hate to love Daemon, I always get grounded by the fact that no matter what, guys, Daemon's still a cop. You know, you can love Daemon all you want, but the reason I'm like, oh, Daemon's cool, I'm like, Daemon's still a cop.
Yeah.
ACAB absolutely includes Daemon in the gold cloaks, guys. I'll say it once, I'll say it again. That's what grounds me. Anytime I'm like, Daemon's the coolest guy, he's still a cop. He's not even a cool cop. He's not even one of the fun ones.
No, he's an asshole cop.
On to number 7. This is a general, just whole of Viserys' character sort of thing. Viserys would have been happy not being king, and he did not abuse his power or privilege. Side note, that was actually part of why, at least in Patty's opinion, Viserys and Daemon didn't get along very well. He did not like how Daemon did consistently abuse his power and privilege. As much as we can say, oh, man, he was too tolerant, he was too lenient a lot of the time, he was an absent father. At the end of the day, I think a big part of why Viserys in House of the Dragon specifically won us over as viewers was because that came across, that he felt that being king was his duty and he played it as such. And maybe we say he seems too lenient and too tolerant. Maybe some of that, him seeming that way, is because he did not abuse his power or privilege. And I guess here's the thing. What does that say about us or about anyone for feeling he was too tolerant or lenient to think, well, maybe we feel that way because he didn't abuse his power?
Yep. That is really good. That's really fucking good. I like that because you're right, he didn't. And the fact that like Daemon was so much the antithesis of what he was, right? Because he was out there and he was the ACAB doing ACAB shit, and like Viserys would never have done that, and he would have definitely been happy not to be king.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I think it's like, you know, hard times make hard men, hard times make peaceful times make peaceful men make hard times. It's this cycle that we kind of get. Viserys is coming in, he's a peaceful man doing peaceful times, and the peaceful times become hard times. It's literally kind of how it all goes. This kind of cycle that tends to be through. I think to an extent, this is A Song of Ice and Fire. We're not used to nice people. even nice people tend to be bad people. Doing it, there's not that we don't got too many of them. So Viserys wasn't abusing his power. He's a lenient king. It's like, well, that doesn't mean he was bad. I mean, he does have flaws, of course. We've discussed those, but it's all of that. And I think what was interesting was Viserys didn't have a title. We have Aegon the Conqueror. We have the Mad King. We have Aegon the Cruel. But it was like, there wasn't one for Viserys in canon. It was just Viserys first. I thought it was nice. It was probably, the king and jaded fun thing that Otto said it was Viserys the Peaceful. I think he gave him that title. And that's kind of something we have now. I think it applies. And that's
the one good thing good old Otto did.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Viserys the Peaceful. To be honest, even saying Viserys the Tolerant is like not the worst thing you can say about somebody. Lenient is,
Yeah. Viserys the Tolerant. That's so good.
But yeah, the fact that he would have been happy not being king, but was anyway, colored his entire rule. And I think that a lot of the flack he got, both from the people in his circle and his family members and from viewers, fans, etc., is misplaced in a way.
It's something that just kind of dawned on me as we were talking about this.
What, that we haven't rated anything on a scale of 1 to 10 dark eyebrows?
You're absolutely right. We didn't even do that.
Well, that's okay. We're going to get to it right now.
Okay.
On a scale of 1 to 10 Targ eyebrows, what is our overall rating of the show's treatment of our king, of the performance by Paddy Considine, of Viserys as a character? Can you average all of your feelings out into a number of 1 to 10 Targ eyebrows?
It's a 10. It's a 10. Big surprise. Spoiler alert. It's a 10. Hands down. 10 out of 10. I love Paddy so much. His fucking character, the stuff he added to it, it's a 10. And honestly, it really is. It should be more than a 10, but I'm trying to play by the rules here. So 10 out of 10 Targ eyebrows. I have them everywhere. Targ eyebrows are everywhere on me. Okay, dude.
They're all filled in.
They're all filled in.
It's Danny's eyebrows, not Viserys or Damon.
Exactly.
Okay, so if I had to get a rating, I'm going to say 8 eyebrows. I would do higher if I'm just kind of recollecting. I honestly love Paddy Considine's performance. I love what he did with it. I love that we got like deep lore from him. I love that we got to see this, like the showrunners and the writers made more out of this, just few paragraphs to like make him an actual proper king and flesh him out and that kind of thing. But objectively, I have to give him an 8 because again, he is meant to be the flick of the dominoes. As much as I loved him, I thought it was great, and I loved the character, and I love what all the things I've said. It's not his saga, it's not his story. He starts it off. Yeah, he is the prequel to the Dance of the Dragons, and that's kind of what we're all here for in Hot D. So if like the lore had him stick around for another season and a half, kind of another half a season, yeah, that'd be cool. Like maybe it'd go to a 9 or a 10, but objectively, it's not about him. It was about him for a lot of things. It definitely was about him for episode 8. But now it's Rhaenyra's and Daemon's and Alicent's and Otto's and all Aemon's time to shine. So I'm going to say 8.
I can definitely see that opinion. See, because I'm looking at it in the sense that there was definitely going to be a season 2, right? And like a season 3. And you're absolutely right. I can definitely agree with that. If they thought that there was only going to be a season 1 and he was just like the domino effect there, then yeah, maybe they shouldn't have focused as much time on him. I can definitely see that.
I'm going to give it a 9.77 out of 10 Targ eyebrows. I know that's an odd number. Yes, I am in a way just trying to be kind of funny. But really, my thought process is Paddy Considine's performance, like 15 out of 10. The character development, what we saw of Viserys versus how little we got in the book is like a solid 10 out of 10. The writing and everything was so amazing, but I think that's what drives it down a little bit. So really, like if I actually average these things out, it would not be a 9.77 because I give the writing and everything probably like an 8.5 out of 10 or something like that. So I think with the 15 out of 10 for the performance, I'm still like over an average of 10. But yeah, to keep within the 1 to 10 scale, it's just some of the odd moments in the show that drive it down a little bit. Those mainly being the awkwardness of the curtains don't match the drapes scene. And I know I put this as a sort of positive, but his decision to not tell Emma what was happening when he made the decision to try to save the baby, and obviously the whole thing with Lena, even though of course I know it needed to be part of the story, but as a whole, I watch a lot of TV and have seen some really great performances, and maybe everything I am thinking is still just colored by how shocked I was that House of the Dragon was so good after how badly Game of Thrones ended. And also, as Manny and I have discussed, Manny in particular, how covering a show on a weekly basis like that really makes you think a lot harder about things. And yes, sure, there's things you don't like, but when it is well done the way House of the Dragon was, it's hard to not have that color your overall opinions of things. I joke it's a 9.77. I would probably give it, like a 9 if I had to go with an even number, but I don't have to because this is my show and I can do what I want.
Exactly. Yeah, going back to like the show itself, I didn't really have plans on watching it at all. I was like, maybe I'll check it out or whatever. And I don't think I was as badly burned as everybody else was with like the last season or the last few seasons of Game of Thrones because I never read the books, So to me, I'm like, well, whatever. Most shows kind of go bad or have like a weird ending and stuff. So it didn't hurt me as much as it did other people. But at that point, I was just kind of so done that when they did House of the Dragon, I was like, maybe I'll check out the first episode. I don't know. And then when the opportunity came along to be on the podcast, I was like, well, okay, now I'm gonna sit down and watch it. I'll either semi enjoy it or I'll hate myself, and this will just be a chore for the next 13 weeks or however long it was, 12 weeks, And I was like, well, let's just see, because I'm not gonna drop out of anything, so I'm definitely was like, well, I'm gonna watch this one way or another now. And I'm telling you, man, shockingly surprised when I saw this. Like, I haven't been this connected to a show or like really wanted to know what was going on, like since like Battlestar Galactica. And anybody who knows me, like Battlestar Galactica was one of the last shows that I'd watched that I was like, it just stole my life. I was everything about that show. And with this, man, I was just like, this is amazing. Like, to me, it was like, so when Game of Thrones came out, everybody was already reading the books and all this kind of stuff. And I was just kind of along like for the ride where I was like, oh, okay, cool. But when I got into this show, I was like, dude, this is the Game of Thrones I've been waiting for. Like this right here. I connected with the characters a lot more than I did with some of the other ones. I mean, some of the other ones were cool. Like I was a fan of Jon Snow. I was a huge fan of Syrio Forel, which they never brought back on the show because I was trained in martial arts and I was trained in sword fighting with a guy that looked just like him and acted just like him. So when I saw the scenes where he's training Arya, like I absolutely fell in love with the character because I was like, oh my God, this is my childhood. Like I'm Arya in these scenes, like this is amazing. And he was gone after that. And okay, whatever. I was always hoping that he would make a comeback, but he never did. But
you weren't alone in that. So
yeah, it was really, really disappointing. And I think just moving on forward from that, I knew that there was going to be a lot of disappointment. And there was a lot of things that I really liked about Game of Thrones. And yeah, towards the end, things I just wasn't crazy about, not believable, but whatever. And when I watched House of the Dragon, like particularly like the writing style that they used, because I've mentioned this, several times on the podcast where they don't spoon feed me anything. They know I'm not stupid. They make me use my brain. And to me, that's what made it like, okay, brevity is the soul of wit here, right? They're not wasting my time at all. They don't have to show kids fighting in the arena. They just showed the kid, and my brain already went there. And it's probably made it a lot worse than what they were going to show, right? When they went into the brothel, did they have to show a bunch of tits and dicks? No, they didn't, because you already knew and you already know what's going on there. It's like, you're not stupid. And I think that just makes every scene so much more poignant. Did there have to be a fight scene with Daemon and the crab feeder? No, that's all flash and all like whatever. What they did was absolutely perfect. My brain finished the scene in my head. And that's what I loved about it, is that it felt like I was actually reading a book, right? When you read a book, you kind of like envision things in your own mind and stuff like that. This is what it felt like. It didn't feel like stupid TV to me at all. And not that Game of Thrones was, but when it comes to House of Dragon, that's what it felt like. It felt like I was just reading a book visually.
Well, and it's funny that you say that too, because again, Game of Thrones is based on these extremely detailed novels, whereas Fire and Blood is not that. So what they pulled from Fire and Blood, the whole section from Viserys being crowned through the end of the Dance of the Dragons is like a third of the book at most. And this one book is shorter, I believe, than it's shorter than I think Dance with Dragons and Feast or Curse for sure. It might even be a shorter book than Storm of Swords. But they took that and they have encompassed it so well that you're saying you felt like you were reading a book, which is amazing because you're right. That is how it feels. And part of that being that they took a character that is relegated to just some brief passages here and there. Like even throughout the story of his reign, the actual details about Viserys are scant. Again, apparently because Martin has admitted he didn't like Viserys, didn't like writing him. But from that, we got this character who, I mean, shoot, like our free folk on Reddit, it's a subreddit for Game of Thrones nonsense, Song of Ice and Fire nonsense. And to be honest, I read our free folk a good bit back the first couple seasons of Game of Thrones, and then I backed away from it because there's a lot of assholes in our free folk. But they have this whole thing, like they call him Vizzy T, like he is like a beloved character on that subreddit. And the thing is, he's a beloved. I don't think I've talked to literally anybody who doesn't like Viserys.
Yeah.
Obviously, like Mo said, he has flaws, but that's the thing. Like they wrote a flawed character and they wrote him so well and he was portrayed so well that we are sitting here. And obviously for the podcast version of this, our recording is edited down a bit, but we've been sitting here for an hour and 45 minutes talking about Viserys, mostly positive stuff. And to be honest, this is like the tip of an iceberg. Like we could probably do 4 episodes just about Viserys.
Just about Viserys. Exactly. And and what's funny is like the thing I was going to point out earlier, it kind of dawned on me that if we're sitting here doing this, if King Viserys was here, he would kind of like bust into the door right now and stumble his way to the throne and be like, why are you guys still discussing me? I thought the matter was settled. Like, I'm a good character.
Either that or he would be like playing with his model of old Valeria. Like,
God bless him. I love Legos too, bro.
Why are you talking about me? I just want to sit here and play with my Legos. Yeah, it's probably the best.
A lot of us, I'm sure, also were skeptical about where House of the Dragon was going to go. I know I was, because just for the sake of like how much money they're going to spend on dragons, right? They got to spend a lot of money to like make a dragon happen, and there's a lot more dragons. So where does the money go if they need to spend a lot on dragons? But I mean, they can obviously, maybe they made it up because they can reuse a lot of the same sets. With the way that they at least did like Viserys, I think it does kind of show how things can keep going in a good, positive way, at least from a fandom opinion perspective of. And yeah, I'm happy for season 2, and I enjoyed season 1.
Yeah, even though I imagine that when season 2 eventually comes out, God knows how long from now, there will be a lot of lamenting about how much we miss Viserys.
Yes.
Like, listen, I know he had to die, obviously, but like, I will always miss that character. I will always miss Paddy Considine's portrayal. I will also say this, meeting Paddy Considine in person. Wow, he is attractive. Like, I was not expecting. I've seen Hot Fuzz. I've seen some of Peaky Blinders, so not all of it, but I've seen some of it. So I might have seen his character in Peaky Blinders, but like now he's just Viserys in my mind. So seeing him in person was like, oh,
dude. Yeah, look, I don't even go in that direction, but I saw the picture with you with him, and I was like, wow, he's like a good-looking guy.
I think he even like has a band, like he plays guitar or something too.
Does. He does.
He's in a band.
Of course he does. Of course. What else would Paddy be doing? He's probably a car mechanic too, and a good cook. And he probably knows how to give back rubs really good also.
All right. Well, as we close out the episode, just want to give a shout out to our Heroes Tier patron, Tommy of the TKOK Podcast Network. Thank you so much for supporting us. Thank you to Mo and to our listeners for joining us for Hot D Gives and Takes. For the most current news and updates about this series, please consider backing our Patreon at patreon.com/geeksaga_entertainment. Or you could also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, like basically all the things at a Geek Saga. But yeah, seriously, please check out our Patreon, because all of these Hot Tea Takes episodes always will be airing on Patreon before they go public. And now that the show is not live, it will probably be more than 24 hours as well. So there's that. So thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank you for listening to the Geek Saga Podcast. If you like what you heard, please check out other Geek Saga entertainment endeavors, including the Sagas and Sass webcast and podcast and Ice and Fire Con.